Good afternoon. My name is Doris Juarez, and I'm a project manager for the Postsecondary Ed team here at Strada. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Charles, also known as Chuck Welch, President of the American Association of State Colleges and Universities. Dr. Welch is no stranger to the mission of expanding opportunity. He is a first-generation college graduate and the first in his family to get an advanced degree. A native of Arkansas, he served his home state as president of Henderson State University and the Arkansas State University system before joining AASCU in 2024. Today, Dr. Welch will share his reflections on the role of public colleges and universities as stewards of place in a rapidly changing economy and society. I had the opportunity to attend AASCU's summer meeting this year, and I was able to see firsthand how folks who lead these institutions do it with so much pride and an unwavering commitment to their mission, and I know that Dr. Welch shares the same commitment. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Welch to the stage.
Doris, thank you very much for those kind words, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank Strada, not only for today, but for everything that you do. We're so appreciative. You've been a great partner of AASCU's and throughout higher education. Stephen, it's always great to be with you. Ruth, I've certainly got to mention as well, and I've got to say, that was one of the best lunches that I've had at a convenient. I figure y'all thought we better feed them well, because if the speech is terrible, at least they'll remember the food was good. So we're going to go with that, but really appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. For those who don't know, AASCU, the American Association of State Colleges and Universities, is one of the 6 higher education presidential associations based in Washington, D.C., and we represent the regional public university sector. Regional publics constitute 520 colleges and universities nationwide in 49 states. The state of Wyoming does not have a regional public university, so there's your trivia fact for the day. Our students make up 70% of public undergraduate students in the United States, and we produce 2/3 of public baccalaureate degrees, 2/3 of public master's degrees, and upwards of 80% of public teacher education and health professions degrees. So we definitely have a very large number of students and really represent what's sometimes called the backbone of higher education, the workhorses of higher education, or the often forgotten sector of higher education. Now, I was educated at a public land grant. I was also educated at a private AAU institution, and I certainly understand the importance of those institutions, those sectors, and the roles that they play, but they're not paying me. So I'm going to talk about regional publics today when I talk about sort of what's going on, talk about what's happening out in the higher education landscape, and then try to make a few suggestions on where we go from here. Let me commend Strada, too, on doing this State Opportunity Index again. I remember shortly after taking over my role at AASCU, I attended this event at the National Press Club, and that thin report sat on my desk for literally a year because I wanted to constantly go back and look at some of those charts that Stephen, quite frankly, haunted me a little bit about some of the things we needed to do better. Well, this year it's not thin. That's a thick packet, and I really want to commend you, too, on the stories you're telling about the states and what's happening there, in addition to the wonderful data and the way that you're looking at it. And I appreciate that this index really calls the importance of the attention to that this is a partnership. Higher education institutions can't do this alone. Business and industry can't do this alone. And policymakers cannot do this alone. We have all got to work together. I also love that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's something that I'm screaming constantly to members of the media and to policymakers, is that you can't talk about higher education as a one-size-fits-all. I recently heard someone say the challenge that we have today is that higher education is being viewed through the lens of 10 institutions. Now, that's not saying those 10 institutions are doing it poorly, But it's not understanding the other things that are happening out there, good, bad, and otherwise, that we really need to understand that full spectrum of higher education. I love the ensuring a strong connection between education and opportunity, because that's really what it's all about, ensuring that our students have opportunity. And one of the things that we talk about a great deal at AASCU is that we want to be stewards of place. And a steward of place basically means we are of the community, from the community, and here to serve the communities. We are here to conduct applied research. Sometimes folks say, well, I guess y'all probably don't do a lot of research. There's a lot of research happening at regional public universities, but it tends to be directly connected to the existing business and industry so that we can help them solve problems, so that we can help them be more efficient, so that we can help them to improve their own companies and thus improve the communities where we are located. I mentioned that we produce 80% of public baccalaureate degrees in teaching and health professions. If you go into a community where an AASCU institution is located or a regional public is located, if you're going to the hospital, it's probably one of our graduates that's helping you. If your children are going to school, it's probably one of our graduates that are helping you. 70% of our students come from a 50-mile radius. They are from the community and of the community. And so when we have these conversations about the economy and these linkages and the opportunity, and when you look at it on the state, that's what we do as institutions, is that focus on that being those stewards of place. And we also take pride in regional publics being social and economic mobility engines. Every year, the Social Mobility Index is published. I'm sure many of you have seen it. And every year, the top 20 are all regional public universities. Because those students that we are serving, many who are first generation, many who are low income, many who are students of color, many who are students from rural communities, we are providing the best opportunity for them to see this opportunity of improving their own life. And then, of course, the Carnegie classifications added a new category recently called Opportunity Colleges and Universities, where they are institutions that show higher than expected student access and earnings compared to similar institutions in their region. 97% of the public universities who received that designation were regional public universities. And that's something we're very proud of and need to be talking about. And then when I read the key takeaway from this report, that 70% of recent public college graduates can expect to experience a positive ROI within 10 years of graduation, my immediate reaction was, that's great. 70%, 7 out of 10. We need to be telling that. And then I got stopped for a second. I have 2 daughters in college and 1 in high school. If they came home and said, Dad, great news, I made a 70 on my test, I'm probably not going to have the same reaction. And so that's literally a true story. So when I sat there for a minute, I thought, Chuck, that's 1 point from a D. We still have work to do, and we must focus on that. Now, I would be remiss, and I would get in trouble with some of our campuses and presidents and faculty members if I didn't at least acknowledge that return on investment is not just economic. There are the non-economic factors, the healthier lifestyles, the fact that a college graduate will live on average 8 years longer than their high school counterparts, or that incarceration rates of a college graduate are much lower than a high school graduate, or that reliance on public support programs is much lower from a college student than a high school graduate, or that unemployment figures are half for a college graduate as opposed to a high school. Or then I think about my own story. Doris mentioned that I'm a first-generation college student. What she didn't mention was my dad didn't graduate high school. My mom is a high school graduate who never attended college. 3 of my 4 grandparents did not complete the 8th grade, and my paternal grandfather could not read or write. So 2 generations ago, my grandfather was illiterate. 1 generation ago, my father couldn't graduate from high school, and today I'm standing up here as the president of one of our higher education national associations. And it's not because I'm the smartest guy in the room. It's not because I'm the best looking guy. Stephen, it's not because I have the best hair. It's because I stopped the cycle in my family and got a college degree that gave me the opportunities to be able to even think about standing up here today. And I'm sure that story and my new colleague, the president of the American Association of Community Colleges, has a very similar story. And I would say to all of you, tell them. I had a colleague of mine one time that asked me to come speak to a group of young students, low-income students, first generation. He said, I want you to come tell your story. And I said, why? And he said, because when they look at you, they think your daddy must have been best friends with the governor. When they look at you, they think he must have been a millionaire at birth. When they look at you, they think he had a silver spoon. They don't realize you had to go through some of those same steps with student loans and your dad losing his job and having to take out a second mortgage. We need to tell those stories, that there is light at the end of the tunnel and that opportunity exists. So we can all realize that there are non-economic factors and that they're very important. We can all realize that. But we've got to do a better job of responding to policymakers, responding to the public, and responding to families. And I will tell you very clearly, their ROI is economic. That's what they are coming to our institutions for. Yeah, they want a better life. How do you define better life? Make more money. Be able to do things my parents couldn't do. Be able to have those opportunities. And we have to talk in those terms and just accept it. And it's okay to do that. I said to the Strada board last week in a conversation we were having that when people ask me what are the 3 greatest challenges facing higher education, I'll say number 1, valuation, number 2, valuation, number 3, valuation. Because until policymakers or families and prospective students value our product, we're never going to be able to incentivize them to give more money to our campuses or to attend our campuses. So let's start talking about it in those terms. We've got to change. Policymakers must change. Business and industry must change. Frequently we'll have policymakers or industry execs say, y'all need to do a better job at X. Y'all could sure improve in Y. Or we'll have the colleges and universities saying, well, we could, but they won't do X, or they won't do Y. Why aren't we sitting in the room saying, what can you do, what could you do, and what can you do to make this better? I had a member of Congress say, Chuck, we joke that y'all are the doctors of no in higher education. You're against everything. Tell us what you're for. Give us solutions. Give us proactive ideas about how we can be better. And that's exactly what these 5 key points in the State Opportunity Index are about. And so I want to go through these points quickly and make a few comments, and then I want to give some examples. When I was chair of the board of AASCU several years ago, the chair gets to choose the theme for the conference. And my theme was telling our story. And I think that goes just in here today, too. We've got to do a better job of telling who we are, who we aren't, where we are and what we do well, and then owning what we don't do very well, and then being willing to get in and roll our sleeves up and do better. And we have a site, a page on our website at AASCU called Promising Practices, where we've asked our campuses to submit different things that they're doing in multiple different areas, many of which overlap with these 5, and I'll use a few of those examples today. But when we talk about clear outcomes, you know, obviously we've got to have the quality and reliable data systems. When I was president of the Arkansas State University system, we brought in a consultant, and he said, Chuck, y'all are great at producing data. And then he just stared at me. We produced a lot of it, did nothing with it. We had to have so we immediately went out and hired the expertise that we needed to help us to analyze that data and understand what it really said and how to focus on it. And then we figured out we also have to disaggregate the data. And that's one of the things I love about this report. You didn't say it's 70%. Let's go out and do better as a country. You said, but in Arkansas, it's 68% at the 4-year level. At the 2-year level, it's whatever. I'm making these numbers up. 62%, right? It's important that we disaggregate the data. States need to have it disaggregated. States need to also disaggregate it by sector, because what a land grant institution has and what they're able to do is very different than a regional public. It's very different from a private. It's very different from a community college. And we need to understand that the intake can also determine what is there for the outcomes. Institutions need to do it by race, by socioeconomic status, by geography, rural. It's an entirely different piece. Gender, I think we all know what's happening there, where males continue to fall even farther and farther behind. And then as institutions, we need to look at it by program. We're very quick to say, we have a 60% graduation rate. Yep, well, what is it in X major? We have a 60% graduation rate overall. We don't know. We don't know what we don't know. And so it's important that we disaggregate that data and not just rely on these big top-level numbers. Institutions also, Harrison, you mentioned this morning the general studies in Texas. Institutions must be able to answer the why and the how. If a student's enrolling in our program, this is why we have it, and this is how you can reach opportunity in that program. And if we can't answer it, maybe we don't need it. Maybe we need to rethink the program itself. The states need to identify and then incentivize the in-demand fields and show where that data is and how many jobs there are. You know, we would hear states say, oh man, we need more of people that are making these certain widgets. We need them. Y'all need to change up your curriculum and focus on making these widgets. Well, how many jobs? Like 6, all right, statewide. So let's have the data, let's identify them, and then let's incentivize the institutions and the students to become a part of that program. And then we've got to think beyond our borders. Stephen and I were just talking about the Postsecondary Employment Outcomes Coalition, PSEO Coalition, and we're somewhere between 30 and 40 now states that are a part of that. One of the most maddening aspects of my life when I was college president is not being able to figure out when that student went across the border what was actually happening to them. And in Arkansas, the University of Arkansas, our flagship, a majority of their freshmen come from Texas. There's a whole lot of Texans, all right? There's more people that graduate from Houston's public schools than graduate from the state of Arkansas in a year. But if they're all going back to Texas, and many of them are, and we can't track what they're doing, then the data is flawed. We don't have a good picture of that. And so we've got to push to get to all 50 states being a part of that PSEO program so that we really have that global view. And then the second point about quality coaching is near and dear to my heart when we talk about supporting and overcoming obstacles, and we talk about education to career pathways and helping students understand labor market opportunities. We have to keep in mind that first-generation, low-income, rural, and historically underserved students may not know any of those things. I didn't have that family support. They supported the concept. They didn't know any of the details. And so we have to make sure that when those students come into our doors, we're helping them from the beginning. So my middle daughter says, Dad, I'm going to do broadcast journalism. I said, okay. What do you want to do with that? I want to be one of those sideline reporters for ESPN. I said, sis, let's think about broadening that a little bit because there aren't a whole lot of those jobs, right? Right? And then I was like, do you even know how many balls is a walk in baseball? I mean, let's get down to that level too. So sometimes we have to help and push that. I'll never forget 2005. I was a community college president in Arkansas. And we introduced a program called Career Pathways. It was a program where we took TANF funds and applied those funds. We got agreement from the state, we got agreement from the feds to take those TANF dollars and apply them to allow students who came to us that met a certain poverty threshold. They had to be parents of students under the age of 21. And it let us apply those dollars to help those students who in most instances would be considered your most at-risk students of not persisting and graduating. And I'll never forget when they brought me the first budget and I looked at it and it was like 90% personnel costs. And I was like, guys, you can't spend every dollar on people. And I'll never forget this young lady looked at me and she said, they need hand-holding. They need attention. They need direction. So I still didn't believe it, but I said, we'll try it. Every year, the graduation rates of that program eclipsed the general graduation rates of the campus because we gave that extra attention and helping those students with understanding how to overcome those obstacles and understanding what could be. Because, you know, we've heard the saying, you can't be what you can't see. That also goes to first-generation students who've never seen it. I'd never seen a man in my family graduate high school or work outside of the fields or driving a semi like my dad did. So when we think about this, we also need to think about it holistically. It's not just about career services. Well, that's what career services does. No, that's what we all do. It's what our advisors do. It's what our counselors do. And it's what we can do even in our curriculum. I showed up my junior year of college to have my academic advising appointment, and my academic advisor was Hillary Clinton's matron of honor. As you might imagine, she didn't leave things unsaid. She said, "What are you going to do when you graduate?" I said, "I'm going to be an attorney. I'm going to law school." And she goes, "You are?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "You're not a lawyer." And I was like, that's the meanest woman I have ever seen in my entire life. She said, "Chuck, you're not a lawyer. My husband's a lawyer. He's half miserable. You'll be fully miserable. You're not a lawyer. Go home, figure out something else, and come back and meet with me in 2 days." I went home and I thought about it and I thought, you know what? That is the meanest woman I've ever met in my entire life. But I went back and I said, I didn't have anything. And I said, well, I was president of the student body. Quick note, I was president of the student body at the University of Arkansas when Stephen was at LSU. No comments on you have to be bald to be in that role. I made that joke last week, and he and I at least laughed about it. But I went back and I said, I've enjoyed working with the administration and the leadership and seeing the impact that they can have, particularly for first-generation students. She said, "That's what you need to do. You don't need to go to law school," and forever altered my life. And so when I think about this career coaching, that wasn't a career services person. That was my academic advisor who's supposed to be checking off some prereq so I could take a course, who literally changed the course of my life. Metropolitan State University in Minnesota has a career readiness project where they offer a unique approach and framework that integrates career readiness into the classroom by aligning course learning outcomes with 10 identified career competencies that employers are seeking in the state of Minnesota. So they've worked with their state, they've worked with employers to identify the competencies, and then they're building it into their curriculum. This is all of us. This is government, industry, institutions, faculty members, academic leadership, and so on. And then affordability. Something that always drove me crazy is when policymakers would scream at me about our tuition, and I'd say, we haven't gotten any new money in 20 years. And then they'd just scream at me about our tuition. But it's not just about new general revenue from the state either. I think we've got to get out of that. We got to just put that away. It's probably not happening anytime soon. But how about if we get the states to incentivize affordability? I can remember campuses saying, we're raising our tuition 10%, and I'd say, we're only doing it 1%, or we're not raising it at all. They would yell at them for one day, say, good job for one day, and then nothing else ever happened. I can take one day of yelling for an additional 9%. So why aren't we really trying to reward those behaviors? And so states that are doing that, I want to encourage and continue to push. And then certainly state-based, needs-based programs to make sure that every student has the same opportunity to create the opportunities that they want. And then states must incentivize the in-demand programs for students. It's something we talk to them about. Help students understand what's there, and that if they will go into this in-demand program, that there's an extra state scholarship for them. If you really want to help, let's help the students get there. Let's provide waivers. Let's provide opportunities at the state level. Now, institutions got our own work to do. Justin's going to love me as I'm going to talk about transparency in our pricing. But some of us got, you get what you pay for. So we jacked up our tuition and then turned around and discounted all of it, and didn't tell that story. So they think they're paying the sticker price that nobody's paying. What is it now? 31% tuition discounting at public universities in a recent report, which I thought was actually low. And we don't do a good job of explaining full cost of attendance. We need to do more at the institutional level on need-based financial aid. That's a hard one, because I'm going to tell you why. The biggest rear-end chewings I got is when we tried to move money from merit to need. And the people screaming at me were the richest people in the room that didn't want their kid to have it taken away from. It's a hard one, but we got to find ways to do it. Northern Arizona University has a promise now, if you make under $65,000 a year as a family, your child goes tuition free to NAU. We got to find more of those programs. Minnesota State Mankato has the MAV Care Student Emergency Fund, $1,000 here, $1,500 there, $750 here, to help fill those critical gaps that could decide whether or not a student stays at the institution. We got to get creative, and we got to find the ways to do it. And another way we can help with affordability is time to degree. The state of Arkansas made a change where they required you couldn't have more than 120 hours, and folks lost their minds. We can't even have the degree. Guess what? They still have the degree. Sometimes we got to get out of our own way and figure out ways that we can be creative and do it. You can also do time to degree through better advising systems. And at AASCU, we've been working on a project with course scheduling. And when they brought it to me, with a funding partner, they brought it to me and said, we want to do this. And I said, let me guess. The hypothesis is we schedule for us and not our students. They were like, yeah, that's it. 9 to 12, Monday through Thursday, because ain't nobody there on a Friday. So we tried to look at where are the bottlenecks occurring, what's happening, what's going on. And I'll just use one campus, Texas A&M San Antonio, Harrison. That campus in one academic year, now this isn't all because of course scheduling, but it certainly had a big piece. In one academic year, they went from 23% of their students enrolled in 15 hours or more to 45% of their students enrolled in 15 hours or more. So we got to step back, use the data, and look at the ways to get there. It's not just about lowering tuition or not raising tuition. There's things we can be doing internally too that can help make that happen. Work-based learning, so critically important. And I was actually somewhat heartened by the percentages. I would have expected them to have been lower in terms of paid internships. Obviously, still have a long way to go, but I actually felt a little better about that. And when we talk about internships, whether it's with private industry, whether it's with state government, whether it's institutions trying to find ways that they can create internships that do work on the campus that is applied to the curriculum, we've got to find ways of rethinking it. Ruth and I have had several conversations about what if we could reimagine federal work study? Because it's under the gun right now. The president's budget zeroed it out. The House and Senate versions bring it back, but not completely. But what if we reimagine federal work study as more of a formal internship or, apprenticeship type program? That would resonate with policymakers who might go, you know what? Maybe we can make this work. So we got to kind of get outside of the way that we've done things. My joke, my staff's heard this, they're going to groan, but is if Thomas Jefferson came back to life, one of the few things he'd recognize is our campuses and the way we do things, because it's kind of like it was when he was around, because we're slow to change. But there are things that we can do and the things that we can be proactive on. I wanted to give an example. I was at a graduation ceremony at Chadron State College in rural western Nebraska, and I was sitting on the stage with their system president, Paul Terman, and we were just talking, and we were talking about work-based learning. And he said, I want to tell you about a program that we're doing. I didn't know anything about it. It wasn't on our website. It wasn't in our promising practices. It is now. And it's a program where there's at Peru State College, also in rural Nebraska, there is a prison there. And they were struggling mightily at the State Corrections Department to hire and retain staffing at a prison. Now, I don't know about y'all, but if McDonald's is down a few folks on employees, I can get past that. If the local prison is understaffed, that causes me a little bit more concern, all right? Y'all are like, by looking at him, he'd be concerned if McDonald's did, but that is aside from the fact. So Peru State said, well, let's see what we can do together. So they partnered with the state, they partnered with the Department of Corrections, and they created a Corrections Leadership Scholarship Program where students attend Peru State during their first year and then participate in a 6-week Department of Corrections training program the following summer. After that, they participate in part-time internships at the prison each semester for the remaining 6 semesters of the program. They offer their courses online and on campus so that the students have opportunities to be flexible. And they offer $12,500 per academic year in tuition, fees, books, room and board, as well as a $2,500 housing allowance for the summer. Upon graduation, with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, these students are eligible to serve in sergeant or higher level positions and then immediately go to work in that prison. Because let's also keep this in mind. If there are 70% of our students coming from a 50-mile radius, there's a reason for that. And it's also usually the reason why they're staying there after they graduate. And so this is one of those types of programs where the state, a local entity, and the college figured out a way to incentivize the work, make it a priority, give students that internship opportunity throughout, and ultimately solve multiple problems. And then lastly, the employer alignment piece. The states must help us by incentivizing institutions to teach these high-cost, high-wage programs. I had a Speaker of the House in Arkansas who ultimately came to work for me, told me one time, he said, Chuck, the reason y'all have problems is your funding formula is so incredibly complicated. He said, K-12s is, hey, we give you, X amount of dollars per FTE. He said, y'all's is all over the place. And I remember him saying that. Well, fast forward 15 years, and I had a senator come and he said, Chuck, this doesn't make sense to anybody. We're going to change. I'm going to file a bill that changes the funding formula to higher ed where it's just per FTE. It's easy. What do you think about that? I said, well, Senator, what I think is that I'm going to immediately only offer 3 programs, philosophy, English, and political science. He said, why? And I said, because I can stick 300 kids in a room with one adjunct and make a whole lot of money, but you have completely disincentivized me from offering nursing or engineering or any high-tech, high-wage. We have to recognize those programs cost more and inherently limit our ability to generate revenue. And he quickly shelved that, right? And yes, I picked out philosophy because they were always throwing it under the bus, and political science because I'm political science, so I can make fun of myself. And English, they're always saying, your English majors work at Starbucks. That's always their thing. So I thought, I'm going to throw it right back in your face here for a second. That was important. Industry can give us that clear and direct feedback regarding the desired skill sets, and not just once. One of the other mistakes I see is we'll get together with them and work it out and then don't meet again for 20 years. And guess what? It's changing on an annual basis. And so we've got to find those ways. Community colleges do a really good job with advisory committees for programs. Universities, not as well as they do. And then at the institutional level, and I love the question this morning, we've got to do a better job of assessing and measuring the durable skills. Now, I've gone to durable skills. Somebody told me soft skills was antiquated. So I've gone to durable, but whatever your terminology is fine. But business and industry does tell us, we will help them make the widget. We want them to be able to think. We want them to be able to write. We want them to be able to communicate. We want them to be able to problem solve. We want them to be able to work collaboratively. We want them to be able to problem solve and adapt and be nimble. And so we have to do a better job of assessing how are the students getting those skills, and then illustrating those for business and industry, that the students are coming out of our institutions with these skill sets to help them to move into those jobs where it's important. From an employer alignment standpoint, one example I use a lot, East Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee, developed what's called the Blue Sky Tennessee Institute with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Tennessee. It's a 27-month accelerated pathway that awards BS in computing, with a concentration in information systems. All the courses that the students take related to the computing program are taken at Blue Cross Blue Shield's headquarters. So they're there on the ground, and the faculty work with a support manager at Blue Cross Blue Shield to help support the program to make sure the learning outcomes are aligned with the skill sets that Blue Cross needs. Students have an internship as Blue Cross trainees. They support Blue Cross business projects, and every member of the Blue Cross team, including the CEO, serve as mentors for the students as they go through the programs. There are also scholarships and other student supports from Chattanooga area educational foundations and Blue Cross that help cover the cost of the delivery. That's the model. Those are the things we've got to be doing that this opportunity index is pointing out. But one thing I want to say before I close is that I kind of went through these, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, but they all fit together. This is one big piece. Now, you may have to perfect one piece of the puzzle before you can make the entire puzzle, but a program I'm really proud of and like to highlight is at Chicago State University. It's called the Cougar Commitment, and they have 4 pillars. Their first pillar is pre-college, and it's where they help students get into the institution. That's the access piece. They have dual enrollment courses for juniors and seniors. They have middle school programs, summer camps, adopt-a-school programs, and financial literacy informational sessions. Then they move into the access and enrollment. They get the students into the institution. They have programs to help remove financial obstacles. They help with scholarships for tuition, textbooks, fees, a laptop for 4 years, a dedicated advisor workshops, and resources. And then the students participate in a summer program that then leads into an internship. They also have a debt forgiveness program and micro grants, like I mentioned earlier. They have a retention and persistence program, which is effectively coaching, where they receive tutoring inside and outside the classroom, mentoring, intensive advising, flexible scheduling to help the students make sure that they can get across those obstacles. And then the fourth pillar is career placement and readiness. And that's the one where they help the students figure out where they can go, where the opportunities exist, where their skill sets match best, and then they work with employers to get them placed. We need more of those models, like that Cougar commitment at Chicago State University, to help these students to make it through. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, we did a national alumni career mobility survey, AASCU did with a number of our campuses last year, to really answer some of the most pressing questions about whether students were satisfied with their degree experience, whether students were satisfied with their current career, and whether they expected to earn more in the future than the household they grew up in. And what we found from those alumni was that 84% were pleased with their educational experience, 83% were satisfied with their current career, and 78% said they expected to make more than the family they grew up in. There's still work to do, but if we can take 8 out of 10 students and help them have a better life than their family had, we're doing some things right. Let's don't forget that. Let's don't lose the piece that there are good things happening out there, but we can always do it better. Colleges and universities, we create opportunity. We create options that maybe had never been imagined. We create social and economic mobility. We create jobs and economic vitality. We create innovation. We create discovery and scientific breakthroughs. And we create families today that are very different than families of one generation ago. Let's double down on those things. Let's do these things better. But most importantly, let's do it together. There's an assault on higher education right now that higher education itself can only do so much with. And let me be clear, the cynicism towards higher education is definitely bipartisan. I've had those conversations in Democratic offices just like Republican offices. Issues may be different, but let's get together, let's band together, and let's show that, hey, we are focused on economic outcomes. We are focused on opportunity for students. We are focused on helping employers do better with the workforce that they have. We are focused on making sure that we can recruit and retain new business and industry by having that educated workforce. And then let's be proactive about it, not just say what we don't like, but talk about what we do like, what we can do, and own that, hey, we've made some mistakes, we're not great in every area, but we can do better, and we're willing to do that. Strada's starting that conversation for us, and I thank them greatly for that. Now it's up for the rest of us to finish the race. Thank you all very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Then what are some of the most important actions? And we are going to get to the panel, and they're going to help us unpack that for this sector. First is the necessity of a shared understanding of the problem and its ecosystem. So we know lots and lots of research reports and white papers and whatnot, but something that Stephen said earlier today was the idea of data that informs action. And it's a different kind of data. If you're looking for data to inform action, it's a different kind of data. It may or may not be a random control trial. It may be a state opportunity index that picks off the most important measures and gives you your dashboard for how a field can start to tack, if any of you are sailors, tack towards right answers. So, these shifts are very important. I'll just give one story from tobacco. We looked at tobacco use, and for many, many years, the problem as society framed it was smoking cessation. How do you get individuals to stop smoking? And it turns out that that's pretty hard. I sort of took out the expletive. I have a bunch of teenagers in my house, so I took out the expletive. It's really hard to get people to stop smoking. It's a cheap, popular, ubiquitous highly addictive habit, and getting people to do it, stop, is really, really hard, if not impossible. So instead, a broader goal of structural reform and response includes prohibiting sale of tobacco, strengthening social stigmas through restricting advertising, mandatory health warnings, restricting locations where you can smoke, taxes, pricing. There's a whole set of contextual factors. If any of you are into the behavioral sciences or behavioral psychology, what are all those nudges that that society kind of uses both wittingly and unwittingly to shape behavior? Now, some people think this is great, by the way. Other people call it a nanny state, but regardless, it works. So whether or not you like it. So that's one set of things, which is, do we have a shared a shared understanding of the problem built on data that is tied to action, not just data in the abstract? The second is setting a set of winnable milestones and honing a really compelling message. So as we think about trying to bring many, many diverse actors to the table, everyone is going to come with their bias, with their constituents and the people that they need to ultimately satisfy. If you want the broadest possible coalition, oftentimes what you need to do is really ground that in a shared, winnable, concrete, emotionally compelling milestone. And here I will use, and it might not be the most obvious one, just like with tobacco, it isn't necessarily the first one you come with. So marriage equality, I won't tell the whole story since many of you know it, but the one really important piece for these purposes is that marriage equality was not on the radar screen of the LGBTQ movement for decades because marriage was seen as a patriarchal, heteronormative institution, and it just wasn't the top priority. There were other things that the movement was really, really worked up about. They were worked up about AIDS. They were worked up about, the visitation rights. They were upset about adoption and laws that were restricting families' ability to do things that heterosexual families could do. So reframing to marriage equality as a winnable milestone was a big thing for the movement. It's hard to remember in retrospect. And changing it from civil rights, which is, do I have the right to visit my partner in the hospital, to the freedom to marry, freedom being a key word, love is love, making the message universal was a really important pivot point, and creating a set of winnable milestones that could galvanize multiple communities behind them. Now, I will say both with tobacco and marriage equality and many other things on this list, these gains are not inevitable and they are not irreversible. So at no point am I trying to argue that these are the most durable or permanent gains, but there are these important pieces, the important milestones that are winnable and then require sustained effort to maintain. A couple more. One is designing approaches, the third one is designing approaches that will work at massive scale. So I like to call this the funding dandelion weeds, not hothouse flowers idea. So if you have a hothouse flower idea, then you tend to it very, very carefully, and you feed it, and you nurture it, and you give it the perfect conditions, and it works for whomever your participants are. They benefit from it, and they go on to do great things. But hothouse flowers don't scale, right? Weeds scale. Dandelions scale. So there's sort of this question of, are you scaling what works, which is a very important idea, but the flip side of it is working what scales. So what scales, and can you improve it for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people? So investing in dandelions, not orchids. The fourth one is driving rather than assuming demand. This one is my favorite, and it's really, really hard for me to not go off on it, but I will basically just short-circuit it by saying that the best efforts put participants who are often poor, often underserved, in the center and treats them like respected customers, for those of you with a business mindset, whose demand needs to be understood and their respect needs to be earned and their experience needs to be validated and incorporated into the design of the programs and services you are hoping will ultimately serve them. So as an affluent white mother, I have no end of apps to help me do what I want to do. And yet for many of the people that all of you are hoping to serve, they don't nearly have that kind of centering in their own experience. So how can we bring participants, people who are most proximate to the problems that we're hoping to help with, how do you bring them into the center? And then finally, and then I'm going to turn it over to our panel, embracing course corrections. So often, measurement and evaluation is used to punish grantees for underperformance or criticize, or in some other way, the accountability feels punitive. It's a very different, measurement as learning is a very different notion from measurement as punitive tools to insert and exert authority and accountability. So how can we think about winnable milestones and what we all collectively need to do to learn and improve over time? So now I'm going to turn to our panelists who are so wise and thoughtful. And we can start anywhere you want, but I think maybe a useful place to start is, given this state opportunity report, what indicators give you confidence or pause, and tell us a little bit about whether we have a shared understanding of the problem that we're hoping to face. So Mike, would you kick us off?
Sure. Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? All right, excellent. Thank you for the introduction. Two things, I guess. First of all, as a Strada board member, I'm just extremely proud of the State Opportunity Index. And as a practitioner with the Alamo colleges, I am thankful, right? I am very thankful. I'm thankful. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Dave and Nicole that did the introduction this morning, the whole Strada team, because what this does is it really, I think, is a catalyzing impact to really create a movement and create a national dialogue about what is so important. It was discussed right after lunch about being able to create a narrative arc of the work that we need to do. And what's particularly important about the SOI is that it does provide that framework for policymakers, since we're in DC, right? And for higher ed leaders like myself to be able to strengthen post-graduation outcomes. And it really is impactful for what I call the holy trinity of higher ed, right? That's colleges or universities with employers and students, right? We need all three of those stakeholder groups to be able to come together and to look at the 5 focus areas in particular. And I was struck by what you talked about in looking at a movement, right, and being able to do that. So the Opportunity Index is a movement for us to be able to catalyze discussion and utilize the data as a framework for change, which I think is very impactful. We can look at that statewide in Texas. And I think that the most important thing that we've experienced as community colleges, Harrison, right, as in your previous role as Commissioner of Higher Education, working with our state association, Jacob Friday was here earlier, and working with elected leaders and with employers, is House Bill 8. Which was focused for our 50 community colleges in particular of performance-based funding with clear milestones. And the conversation shifts then in looking at a student enrolling in a course and being there on census date to actually achieving specific milestones, and for us to utilize what's called credentials of value and ensure that they're placed into high-wage, high-demand fields. And so nationally, it is looking at that arc and then being able to look at those green shoots, and they're profiled in the report about who is advancing in which area. And Dave said it, I think this morning, it's not for us to race against each other, but for us to be able to know where our baseline is and then to be able to make an impact and progress.
Terrific, thank you. Cheryl?
Does this work? Ooh, I don't have to turn it on. Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I'm so thrilled to be with these two gentlemen on stage. Couple of things I wanted to react to. So your first question about sort of things that stood out or maybe made me pause. I was frustrated, I guess, a little bit to see that we still don't have, and I spent 15 years at the U.S. Chamber, so I have employers on the mind all the time. I've only been at BPC for a year, and I think I've got some old colleagues in the room here, and so I'll just brag on them a little bit more in the work that they do with employers across the country. But it's frustrating to see that no state is leading in the employer alignment piece, and I think that without that piece, we will struggle to achieve the movement that we all are here to talk about. And it's maybe the toughest nut to crack, right? I mean, it is, the Chamber's been at it for years with the support of Strada and lots of others, and there's bright spots across the country, and there's, wonderful work happening, but it's long slog work. And so your comment about, 20 years, 45 years, I mean, this is going to take some real time and dedicated focus and effort and leadership on behalf of the employer community. And so, one of the things that we always said at the Chamber was there was no blame to be placed on the education community when the alignment wasn't there. We really tried to approach it from the perspective of employers need to stand up. Employers need to step up and lead and do things in a different way. They need to think about their talent the way they do their supply chain, and it wasn't something that they had done before. And so providing them the tools in order to do that is really intensive, work that people have to be tasked with doing and get up every day committed to doing it. And so anyway, that was the thing that, I guess most gave me pause. One of the other pieces that I was struck by, I think, when you were talking about the various, the analysis of the various movements over time, and one of the things that stuck out to me and is, these aren't the words you used, but policy counts, policy matters. And I see this a lot in Washington, and especially with philanthropy, people don't want to fund policy movement. They don't, it's especially now, it feels a little daunting, it feels a little frustrating, it feels like there's, nothing's going to happen in Washington, so why are we paying attention to what happens in Washington? We need to be focused, out in the communities, which need to do that, absolutely. But policy matters, and when you don't change the policy, we're not ultimately going to get there either. And so I guess I put my BPC hat on when I say that, which is the work that my current organization does is to really develop the sort of bipartisan solutions to some of the most pressing challenges the nation has. And bipartisanship, people joke when, especially when my boss says she went to lead the Bipartisan Policy Center, they look at her and they're like, it must be the loneliest job on the planet. Like, nobody is doing bipartisanship, but they are. And we see it all the time, these little bright spots of bipartisanship. Members of Congress absolutely do want to work together, and we see it happen all the time. And so I'm heartened by that, and I think there's real opportunity in a lot of this. And then finally, I'll say, just I think echoing a little bit what Mike said, this State Opportunity Index actually provides the framework. It helps us to understand, I guess it gives us something to kind of come together around and then to develop that shared understanding. I'm a little bit, I don't know if we do have the shared understanding. I think we do on pieces, but I would, is the real issue cost? Is the real issue employer alignment? Is the issue that maybe not all of higher ed believes it's their job to be thinking about workforce outcomes or employment outcomes. So I think there's challenges in all of those pieces, but I think the SOI really helps to provide that framework and gives us something to sort of motivate us and bring us together.
Well, tough act to follow. My two colleagues here. Let me begin by thanking Strada and all the conveners, but I also want to thank all of you because this is, for me, the most inspirational topic, thing that I can be involved doing as Chancellor of the City University of New York, and your energy, your commitment, what we have achieved so far together, and the work that we will continue to do as a result of the gaps that we have identified because we're committed to these, energize me. And I think that this is a time where many of us, particularly in higher ed, need things to be energized and have purpose about. So thank you for the convening and for this space in the day here today. And I feel very strong about that, and I'll share a very personal anecdote. We're traveling, two boys, they both graduated this year, so we did a family trip to celebrate that I was not paying tuition, at least for a while, right? And with my wife, at the same time that I had to every now and then leave the family to go in a Zoom to do prep sessions for a special invitation that I had received to testify at a lovely congressional hearing, right? And for the first time, I've been chancellor 7 years. I was president twice, 5 years each in the CUNY system. The first time that my family sat around the table and said, you know, this is getting crazy. If you want to do something else, we have your back, right? And I thanked my family, and I said, you guys crazy? There is vital, important work that we are launching at CUNY, which is tied to this whole work of career outcomes and engagement that I've been working for the past 7 years, right? And this is the time for us to double down on this work, right? And that's why I'm here today. And I don't know if this work is going to take some of the examples you gave, but we're in for the long run, right? For all the right reasons that have been documented here today. I leave today with vindications of some of the things that we're doing at CUNY, which is like, okay, shit, good, right? That we're doing. There's some things here that are being validated by other people. My team actually is dreading that I came because they already saw me taking notes on a whole bunch of other things, right? Also made me more thoughtful of the role that I as chancellor play in terms of the public policy, things that need to be advocated for within the state of New York. I mean, some of these things, for example, today on some of the additional work that we need to do in better data sharing, how we understand all that data so that we can actually have really the best set of ammunition to guide the work that we do, and to be both aspirational but also fair with ourselves in what is really attainable and what can be done, right? Which I think is equally important if you're going to lead, an army into battle, and then also the ongoing work that needs to be done with the employment community. So again, as both my colleagues here said, there's plenty of work to be done, and they're identified, and the State Opportunity Index provides a roadmap. But for me, I am excited by the progress, and I think that we might not and I think they're correct, that we might not have all the exact definitions and we might need to work a little bit more on that front. But everybody's talking about it, right? Maybe different language, and maybe some people with different agendas, but everybody's talking about it, right? If we don't seize the moment, everybody in higher ed is trying to figure out, independent of what kind of institution you are, how do I get better at doing this, right? All the elected officials know that is one of the key drivers of parents and the kids going particularly to their public institutions, and they need to figure out how to do a far better job there, right? And the employment community, right, always is looking for talent. So they're always looking for that alignment. And we have so many things here that work. And think about even things that I'm going to stick to higher ed because it's obviously the lane that I know the best, but things that don't change. I mean, Chuck mentioned the Carnegie classifications, right? Talk about things that were written in stone and that nobody really knew exactly what they meant, right? And kudos to my partners in ACE for taking it on, right? And cleaning it up. And then also highlighting the work that we do in social mobility, but also creating a structure that allows us to be challenged to even do more in that sector. So work to be done, but I am extremely energized by what I have seen here today, by the example in many of the panels, and leave this place even more committed for the work that we're doing at CUNY and that we will continue to do.
Terrific. So let me just pick up on these last two comments. As we talk about which pieces of the problem we have a better sense of and which ones we feel like still need to get wrestled down. You can argue about angels dancing on the head of a pin and all kinds of unproductive definitional conversations, but I want to home in on like the framing problem and making sure that we understand how the different pieces of this are framed. So, Cheryl, maybe I can start with you since you started us on this road of which pieces do you feel like, yeah, okay, we kind of get it. We kind of understand the framing of it, and here's how I would say it. And then where are there places where it's not as clear? There isn't as much consensus yet, and there needs to be more wrestling down of like, well, what are we trying to solve for? What does success look like? What are we trying to do here?
Let me think about this for a second. I do think I agree with you wholeheartedly. Everyone's talking about it. We've definitely, I think in the last 5 years, we're talking about skills. Like there's a whole, there's definitely a much clearer, sort of focus on skills. I don't know that we all necessarily know what we're talking about when we say that, but there's a lot of energy in that direction, right? And so I'm going to go off a little bit and say, one of the things that I started when I went to BPC is this Commission on the American Workforce, and the whole idea was to develop a talent strategy for the nation. The idea that we don't, as a nation, we've got an economic strategy, we've got a national security strategy. We do every year or a couple years, every administration, we do this. We don't do this as a nation around talent. And so we're very disparate. We've got a lot of, we do have a lot of momentum. We've got a lot of people talking about a lot of different things. But do we have sort of a shared strategy for what the nation needs in terms of talent? And then what does that mean? Not just in post-secondary education, but in K through 12 education, in, worker supports, a lot of, we're trying to sort of tackle all those pieces. But I do think it comes back around to this idea of do we have a clear understanding of the problem? I do in some ways think that we do, and just around this idea of workforce, and I don't know if that's, I'll look to my colleagues to correct me if that is a dirty word when in a room full of higher education leaders. But I'll give an example. I've worked in childcare as an issue for a really long time, not a really long time, but maybe a decade or so. And that was an area that needed some real, under-resourced. We don't fund it. Everybody's lacking it. We don't have the supply. I mean, 1,000,001 issues. Generally, bipartisan, support around the programs of childcare, but we still so much to do there, and flipping how we talked about it. So I was thinking about, I think you said something about messaging and sort of that being kind of a key component in a movement, and the storytelling and the messaging. And when we started, COVID was a little bit part of this, but it started before COVID. When we started talking about this issue as a workforce issue, it shifted the broader support, brought more support and broader support for the issue. Talking about the brain science, like, I care about that, and everybody's got a kid cares about that, but that wasn't what sort of moved policymakers. So when we started talking about it as a workforce issue, and that is really and then COVID, and that really has just stuck. And so I just wonder about, this idea of really kind of talking about this more as kind of the workforce issue, the economic outcomes, and that is what will galvanize.
I love that example. It's such a good example because brain science may or may not resonate with employers across the state or with legislators.
They know when they don't have workers to show up.
But they know when they don't have workers because of childcare.
Policymakers listen to employers, and they listen to the struggles of their...
Can I, 2 seconds. Can I use childcare as work to be done, right? So we align. We start training all the staff to go do work in childcare, and then the data comes that they earn salaries that are below the living wage. Higher ed failed, right? That is why we need to do also that. For me, that's the element of being fair, right, in this conversation, right? That we need to do all those alignments. I mean, we do need to be training the best people to be able to do those things. But when we build, and we're in an important moment in which, with some of the last federal legislation, all these definitions are coming in terms of the loans and the programs that they can take money and all kinds of assumptions of ROI, right? We need to get that part well, right? So that the alignment is there, and we change what we have to change. But in some of the instances where we might not control wages, right? That if the system works in bringing up the people to be able to do that, and folks have been making decisions that have been informed, right, which I think is a key component of the state index, right? That coaching and people knowing the consequences, right? And they made a decision to do that we don't go back and then it becomes a red flag, right? So sorry, because that led me about the work that needs to be done for all the right reasons.
Beautiful.
I was going to say, I think, looking at the bright spots, right? Looking at the things, being mindful of the context. This is all part of a movement and a conversation that has a catalytic impact. I think higher ed and others within workforce agencies, policymakers should, take a victory lap with passage of Workforce Pell, right? I think that's very, very critical. And we probably don't know, in a sense, the impact that that's going to have. But I see in our short-term training programs back home, the individuals that are in those classrooms, that are in those labs, right? Predominantly women of color, who want a better life for not only themselves, most importantly for their families. So to be able to resource short-term certification from 8 to 15 weeks, I think is so very important and crucial, and that it's stackable. that we've learned from childcare, and that we can actually provide a family-sustaining wage and short-term certifications that can lead to a pathway to a degree, I think is particularly critical. Most individuals, most in short-term certification, are locking into healthcare because they can see it. They know that being a patient care technician or a phlebotomist can then lead to being an LVN and then an RN or into another field in healthcare. And I think that that is affirming when, 78% of our students back home are students of color, right? They're brown and black and predominantly women, and they're poor. And I think that this provides something that is really critical, because what it's saying is we want to have those intentional conversations with you, which is the quality coaching focus area. We want to be able to ensure that we're placing you into some career in a program that's going to have a pathway to the middle class. Kind of like what you said, Chuck. I think they all think that we just kind of landed here, right, at home plate. And it involved years of struggle, and oftentimes it started in the same classrooms where our students are. And I think that gives me a sense as during trying times, that gives me a sense of hope and affirmation that we're doing something that is so impactful at the same time that the SOI comes out and says, here are the tenets, here are the focus areas that you really need to key in on as a higher ed system, serving these students to be able to do these things. And what I'll take back home is being able to talk to my colleagues about, we've done this before. We did it with the launch of a Promise program that moved, right, the college going rate from 45% in our county high schools to 58% in 5 years. We did it as a state with performance-based funding. So we can do it a third time with this conversation about the focus areas that are necessary. And it's serendipitous that or maybe not, maybe it was by design, right, that Workforce Pell is coming in at the same time that we're having conversations, that we're gathered here to be able to say, what are the things that we need to do to advance? How can I learn from what CUNY is doing? How can I bring back home Accelerate Mississippi, right? How can I ensure that these are the tenets, the intentional pieces that we need to have in place so we can provide our students with a pathway to the middle class at many times when a majority of folks are saying they don't know that they're going to live or have a better life than their parents did. So I think that this is so very impactful and powerful.
So sometimes when you're a moderator, you come up with, maybe 10 or 12 questions, and then you realize you don't have that much time. You have to narrow it down to like 4 really good zingers. And then your panelists answer some of the ones on your cut list. And so first of all, what I love about this is that so much of the framing has to include the whole picture. So just as you were saying, Felix, you can't, discount or you can't set aside, well, what is the wage for people? Once you have all of these different, policy objectives, what is the living wage going to be? Or where can we use our experience in the past where we had success and social movements to give us enough momentum, enough energy to slog through this? I mean, it's hard, right? It's long and hard, and how do we keep that? So, but what this is also making me wonder is, there are so many different silos of actors, each of whom has their own set of incentives. So if I think about, we named some of them here when we were talking about early ed and Promise, but as you think about employers, you think about policymakers, you think about intermediaries like Strada, you think about, and many of you in the audience, if you think about the individuals who are experiencing these issues firsthand, and you think about academics. Let's talk a little bit about what role each of them has to play. What is the highest and best use of each of their voices and talents in this fight? And you can, if you have opinions on all of them, you can address all of them, or if you have a few that are your favorites, you feel free to start there. But I really would love to hear from you guys. What is the highest and best use of people's time, given the different hats they wear and the flags that they come to the table with and they plant in front of them?
So I'll take two groups, right? And one I think has been said by a couple of panelists here today, but I want to make sure is faculty are an indispensable resource in this conversation. And when we began the journey at CUNY, I have been a faculty member, right, prior to going to the dark side of administration. And I know that faculty do care. They care. They might be peculiar in the way that they talk about that care at times, right? So what we did is we went to the Faculty Senate and I say, I want to survey the faculty in the system about how they feel about this, right? And 94% said, we understand that it's the faculty's responsibility to help the students in their journey towards careers or their professional growth, right? Which is what I thought. And then the second thing is, whenever you ask any group in a university, is we need resources, right? We are not trained. I'm a historian. I was never trained to be thinking about that when I was asked to put together a course outline on the history of the Caribbean, which is what I used to teach, right? So help us think about how from these roles we can do differently. And we have now 4 cohorts of career success faculty fellows. And this is what they've been doing in the system. Part because I know that voice is indispensable to any change that we might want to do in the university. I also wanted, so whenever we're ready to say we're coming down with the system change, to have an army already of faculty that can speak to the fellow faculty and show them, right, the things that they can be doing. And what they did is they were coming from all disciplines. And they were all saying, if you have more intentionality in having this support for the students in thinking about careers, right, you can continue to teach some of the things you like to teach, right? But in the way that class is taught, be more intentional about the way that you talk about things that are concretely helpful to the students, right? And to signal to them that you're part of their journey in doing that and that you can help them connect to resources. And we have now a really fabulous page of all the work from all these fellows, and it's, English, anthropology, biology, you name the discipline, and they have classes and they have language for the other faculty to be able to talk about doing this kind of work. I think moving down the pike, different teaching and methodology is going to be part of the conversation, but we already have an army of the willing wanting to be part of the conversation in that front. And then, the other group, which I think is indispensable here, are the employers, right? And you were talking about that. If I want to have every CUNY student have an internship by the end of the year, right? Or, that once in your 4 years you've done that, I need 45,000 new paid internships in the city of New York, right? And even if I use my work study and my own resources to do that, right? So I can produce that. I need partners who see that as equally important in what they're doing. And I need a state that, if the employer partners are not incentivized for all the right reasons, that they might help incentivize them with some tax support or some other ways that then also allows them to, in their bottom line, be helpful. And we've seen some examples of programs leading in that direction here, which are very encouraging. But that is an indispensable part. The employer side of the equation, I cannot force people to come talk about innovating curricular change. right? I mean, that needs to be incentivized. And luckily, we do have a set of partners that are with us in that journey, and that can be a way that they can encourage some more. But those are two key groups in making this scale change possible.
I'll just add on to what you were saying about the internships. I also sit on the State Council of Higher Education in Virginia, and we've made it a priority in the state to provide a work-based learning opportunity for every student in higher education that wants one. Again, really hard to do if you don't have partners in the employer community. And I think where, and I guess I want to just double down on your comment about having the state partner, right? Like, we've invested financially in this. I think there's more we need to do as a state to really think about the, maybe it's the, in addition to incentives for employers, but the coordination as a state and sort of the infrastructure, frankly, that is likely needed at the state level to really, again, have people getting up every single day, developing those employer partnerships, talking to employers. I mean, it's leadership, it's some infrastructure. It can't be a kind of a one-off thing. I also think it's probably not the best strategy to rely on the institutions to do it individually. I think it can work that way, but I think that, really, as a state, if this is going to be a state commitment, then really putting that infrastructure in place to get it done. Again, to the employers, I think the highest and best use of them is being clear about what it is you need students to know and be able to do, and entering into those partnerships either with your competitors. When we first started something called Talent Pipeline Management, and I think might be some folks in this room that are implementing it. I see Jennifer Miller. Oh my God, she's a superstar. Is people said employers aren't going to get in a room with their competitors and share data and work together to build pipelines of talent. Jennifer can tell you that actually will happen when they recognize they can't just continue to poach from one another. They need to expand the pipeline for everybody. And what does that mean to expand the pipeline for everybody? It means they need to work together. They need to come together in common cause. They need to share data. They need to say, okay, what is it, let's figure out what are those jobs that are most critical that we aren't filling right now, that we are all suffering these pain points together, and let's do that work together as employers, and then we'll go to the preferred providers of talent, those higher ed institutions that are like, okay, we'll adjust what we're doing, we'll revise our curriculum, we'll work with you, and we'll stand up that pipeline. But I think, they have to commit to it. They've got to stand up and say. And then I think on the higher ed side, and you guys will know way better than I do whether this is happening in any sort of real concerted way, but if we are moving towards this idea of talking more in the language of skills, is higher ed moving towards a place where I leave, I graduated from TCU with a bachelor's degree in political science. I have no idea what skills that provided me. And do students that are leaving a traditional post-secondary education with a piece of paper, are they able to communicate in the language of skills if that's where we're headed, and be able to own that data themselves and be able to communicate to an employer? I think these are the places that we're headed that are that I think can ultimately really support the individual with better economic outcomes. But we all have to be doing some things a little differently.
I was going to say, I think those are the two of the focus areas, right? Work-based learning and employer alignment are probably the most challenging for us to be able to do that. How do we do that at scale, right? And particular for our learner profile back home, when I introduce myself, I say I work for the community's largest human resource agency. And they're like, where do you work? And so then I tell them, and I say, but we graduate 14,000 students a year, so we want to make sure that we provide talent to your organization in the private or the public sector. And we participate in TPM, right? Through the U.S. Chamber, we have a wonderful case study with EY in which they've hired over 200 of our students, but we have close to 90,000 students. So I think that is the piece that seems the most challenging, not daunting, but challenging, is being able to look at not only creating that experience of work-based learning, right? That praxis between the theory and the application, but then also bringing in that third critical stakeholder group of employers and being able to do that at scale. I think that we've gotten through the translation and the different jargon that we use, but it's really being able to bring those employers at scale. Felix, you mentioned 45,000, right, slots that you would need to create. And it's the same for us, is how are we able to do that, in particular for first-generation college students that don't have the social capital to be able to do that. I think any of our family members or kids, we're able to pick up the phone or to send a text or an email, and we can provide them at least with an experience in which they can shadow someone that we know or a colleague. But our 90,000 students, the vast majority don't have that. And so we need to be able to do that. And I think that, I guess that would be the call to action, right, as we get close to the end of the panel, is how do we do that at scale? How can we do that to be able to inform the U.S. Chamber working with others in a coalition of the willing and BPC to be able to come back for higher ed practitioners and the associations to say, this is what we really need. We really need the employer alignment because we want to create those work-based learning experience for our students, but we need you at the table to buy in, to be able to do it, and to do it at scale. We have plenty of examples in which we do it for groups, but I think it is how do we create scale to be able to have that movement for our folks.
So on the internship, one of the things, when you try to think about different formulations, right? And this is, I think, probably easier for the community colleges and for the regional publics because our price point is so affordable. When I was, before being chancellor, I was the president of Queens College, one of the four-year schools in the system. And when the alumni used to come to me, they normally would say, I want to give you $7,000 for a one-year scholarship, because that's what tuition for the year would cost at Queens. And I said, nope, I don't want it. They looked at me like I was from another planet. And I said, give me that $7,000 in a paid internship for the student. At the end of the day, right, if the student is already on, and 68% of our students between the state aid and federal aid don't pay tuition, that's $7,000 in their pocket for the money for all the things we know derail them. Metro cars, transportation, childcare, all those things, right? If they're paying out of pocket, you're giving them a scholarship with that money. But it's a scholarship with the ROI of the social capital of having gone through a paid internship. So I always, on this paid internship space, in trying to find funding, there might be some play with financial aid and other ways to think about that investment on the students that might facilitate more state aid, more companies to do it. If you think about it, and I think it's something that you can do in the schools that are more affordable, right? If you're charging $7,000, and that they ain't going to do too much for the student. But I always thought that was a way in which you could play from a policy angle because, I don't know what tuition is in one of your schools, but if somebody gave a student $2,000 for a paid internship in a semester, that would make the heck of a difference in their lives.
Two quick things. Cheryl, you hit on this really early on, and I think, this is good to see you as always. that if the employer community doesn't get involved in letting educators know, you can't blame the educators for that. So we've got to figure out how to make that work. It's one of our key issues. And then at the end, when you were talking about instead of a scholarship, put that money toward a paid internship, what they're going to learn in those few weeks of how the real world works, what is expected in business, will change. You're right, it will change a student's life. So we have two major challenges coming out of this just from those 2 points, in my opinion. If we accept those challenges and turn them into opportunities, we will see this thing start to turn.
Excellent. All right. Other brave souls. Headlines.
So I was riffing off of the chancellor's 45,000 internships in the city of New York, and I lead a state agency in the state of Washington on the higher education front, and it's sort of like, so I've always been someone who has worked in the corporate world, worked in the nonprofit world, worked in the government world. Employers include all of that, right? So I see the notion of a vision to apply to your place is if you have somebody like a mayor and a governor, and I know the MTA, it's got to be one of their holy leaders or whatever, but they make a commitment and commensurate with their level of employment in the city, which is going to be pretty significant, that says we will do these across all of our functions because there's massive IT, there's massive HR, there whatever, and so you would actually have public sector government employers sort of trying to lead the way to show how it can be done while you continue to evangelize and promote in the private sector.
Excellent. All right, a couple more.
We began with the MTA, so we began that. They're taking about 30 or 40 students every year.
Excellent. One or two more.
All right, I just have a quick headline. CUNY system and New York employers recognize career success faculty fellows. That's what I want to see promoted.
Excellent. All right. One more. Great.
Thank you. Just quick. I'm Sasha Lotus from Academy of Hope Adult Public Charter School here in DC. It's been a wonderful day, so thank you so much. My big question, though, is where is adult education within these conversations, as well as WIOA-funded programs? Because we're facing the exact same issues.
All right. Terrific. So I'm going to give our panelists the last word. I gave them the same assignment, which is give us your headline, your summary, your takeaway messages. So why don't we go in reverse order? Felix, do you want to start, and we'll come back down?
Well, I mean, I want to invite everybody for, let's say, 3 years? Big party, we come back and we celebrate all the things that we were able to change, right? And we bring back a number of our alumni who can tell the stories about how some of the things that we all put together here help them to transform their lives and also help transform our communities into much vibrant, stable communities. So I think I'll end by saying something. We're in D.C. The other part, too, which gives me hope about our capacity to do work, and obviously here we've been focusing on the state levels, which I think that's quite appropriate, is that, if we frame this right, this might be one of the few spaces for bipartisanship policymaking in the immediate future. Right? And that is not an insignificant thing.
I think I would just say, we've got all the pieces to the movement, and I think we need the organization to own it and move it, and I think that's Strada is the place that can do that. Sorry, we'll just put you on the spot. With a lot of other actors, but I think we can get everybody on board with it. But there needs to be like the CEO, right? We need the CEO of the movement to bring all the pieces together. But I think that we know what we got to do, and we're headed in the right direction. And I think everybody in this room would raise their hand and say, I'm on board, sign me up, put me in, coach. I know we would. And so I feel energized by the prospect. And again, I think in couple years, we'll come back and, in 10 years, we'll be on to the different movement. But this is the one for now.
I would say just thank you to Strada. This is only the second year, right, of the State Opportunity Index. So considering the conversation this afternoon and throughout the day, I think that's impactful for being able to do that. And talent creation is bipartisan, right? I think that that's what's most important. And we all want a better life for our children, for their families, for our neighbors, and our communities back home. So thank you.
Terrific. Well, I just want to thank our panelists, if we can give it up for them for their experience, their insights. Thank you to Strada for hosting us. Thank you to the entire leadership team, but thank you also to all of the people at Strada who've done work up and down and sideways to make today happen. I want to thank all of the people who are helpful in our facilities and making this facility beautiful for us and so welcoming. So thank you to the facilities folks as well. And I'll just leave you with the notion of long spoons. This really has been a day of feeding each other. And so thank you all for being here and continuing the conversation and continuing to make progress against these important metrics. So have a good trip home. And there's one more speech, I think, before, and then have a good trip home. All right. Thanks so much.
What an amazing day. Would you agree? Yeah, how about it? Just phenomenal. So thank you. Really from the bottom of our hearts to say the energy, the generosity, the good spirit of goodwill, the openness, the sharing of ideas, and the willingness to say, we don't yet do this so well, but boy, do we want to. And we see around this room ideas for how to accomplish that. I have rarely been in such great company, so thank you for the privilege of being with you. Who has been inspired at least once today? You got to raise your hand. All right, at least once. Now, this one's ever so slightly harder. Are you ready to join in this effort to strengthen education to opportunity pathways for more learners? Are you ready to be part of it? Stand up for a second. Yeah, a good stretch. I see. Yes. Awesome. And do you, I guess, realize that there would be massive public shaming for anybody who did not stand up right at that moment? So thank you for not resisting my irresistibility there. So I have just a couple quick things to say. One of them, throughout this day, starting with Ernest Newborn, who talked about states as laboratories of opportunity, we have heard about the important role that states play. Of course, states, the institutions within them, the universities that serve students directly. We have heard about the important roles that employers play. One of the unique things about this day, and maybe the most energizing, is how many people from those different places are together in this room and in this conversation, and how many people across those sectors stood up and said they were ready to strengthen education to opportunity pathways. Enormous commitment, enormous power represented in this room, and incredible opportunity in front of us. I have had the privilege of working and leading in higher education in two very different states, Illinois and Utah. And in those two contexts, one thing that was very common was this important role that states and state systems play, and the fact that talent needs, workforce needs were just as relevant in these two very different places. We've heard that as a strong theme for this day. I heard a lot of great insights from you today, ideas that you have about making a better future for students and learners in America. Certainly, I think I could just start down the road of repeating lots of them, but inspiring ideas coming from you. At lunch, I had the privilege of sitting with Jeff Cox, a new acquaintance for me from North Carolina. And Jeff talked about a very innovative public-private partnership between the legislature, philanthropy, institutions to bring education to career coaching to students in high school as they're thinking about their pathway. It was stellar and an example that many states can follow. We heard so many of those today. I I think just remarkable stories of what people are doing in their institutions. So now what? After all this inspiration, after all this energy, after the fact that you are willing to stand up and say, I want to be part of this, what happens next? What do we do now? So I think, Chancellor Matos Rodriguez said very well, this is the time to double down. Chuck Welch said it at lunch. What can we do together? What's possible here? Yes, states are at different stages and in different contexts and in different environments in their journey to link education to work. I think we have absolute common cause in lifting up this conversation about post-college outcomes. What happens to learners after education and training matters? And it matters to every person in this room, as you have said clearly today. What I see happening around us is that it may be time for us to commit a new commitment to America's post-secondary learners. What is that new commitment to America's post-secondary learners? Well, I think we want to ensure that every learner has what they need and deserve to achieve a better outcome. Today, we've heard that means guidance, support, and information about outcomes of programs early enough in their program to help them make a decision that works for them and their life. Absolute clarity on the cost of a program from the beginning and forward. Opportunities for work-based learning for every learner, and certainly the ability to pursue programs that connect to employers' needs. That capacity to be aware of what those programs are and the capacity to access them. So now, as we go, I encourage you, in whatever role you play, there are individuals at states, individuals at institutions, individuals that are coming from employment, Chamber of Commerce, there are some policy folks here, there are strategic advisors here, there are some higher ed associations here, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some. It's quite a remarkable array of people. And what we share is the opportunity to use these data, use some of the examples you've heard, take these inspiring good ideas and consider what applies to your context. How can you take these ideas forward in your state, in your region, with the students you serve, and help every student realize a return on their investment in education after high school? I think if we've learned anything from other movements as they go forward, is that progress will require leadership. I'd say we heard that loud and clear from Aaron Thompson from Kentucky today in the affordability session. Leadership matters. We also need a big tent approach, ways that include all of us that are represented here, and a lot of evidence and data where we started this day about what works and is not working well for our students. Today underscored that we have a lot of people committed to this effort, to building this movement, and we have great ingredients for what it will take to go forward. I pledge personally, and I know my colleagues at Strada do, to remain engaged with you beyond today. We sincerely want your feedback, both on this day and on what we're trying to do, and to think about how we make this better and stronger in the time to come. In fact, I think I heard from Chancellor Matos Rodriguez, that there will be a big party in the future. Did you promise that, Felo? He said 3 years from now. What did he say? Strada funded. Well, but of course. I love how he says that just soft enough that I can't quite hear it. So I have to ask for clarification from others. We wish you safe travels back home. We thank you for the incredible commitment that you are showing to learners. We wish you great success in your day-to-day work and in our shared mission of connecting education to opportunity. I think clearly today we have a message that tells us the time is now and we are the people to mobilize around this effort and help make it happen. And you have it from Felo. There's a big party in the future. Thank you so much.